The Magic in Your Mind by U.S. Andersen. Chapter 1. The Hidden Cause of All Things. Action versus reaction. Mastery over life is not attained by dominion over material things, but by mental perception of their true cause and nature. The wise man does not attempt to bend the world to fit his way, or to coerce events into a replica of his desires, but instead he strives for a higher consciousness that enables him to perceive the secret cause behind all things. Thus, he finds a prominent place in events. By his utter harmony with them, he actually appears to be moulding them. He moves effortlessly through the most strenuous action, the most perilous times, because his attunement with the mental force that controls the universe guides him to perform the work that needs to be done. The electromagnetic mind. This mental force that controls the universe may be called anything you like and visualized any way you choose. The important thing is to understand that it exists, to know something about how it works, what your relationship to it is. It might, for instance, be likened to an enormous electromagnetic field. All conscious forms of life would be tiny electromagnetic fields within the universal field, and finding positions within it, each according to the kind and quality of its field. Where each individual field would wind up within the main field, then would be a matter of inexorable law and absolutely unavoidable, as is illustrated by the millions of people who perform the same tasks over and over with absolutely the same results, almost as if following a ritual. Perhaps they are always sick, always defeated, just barely misers, perhaps always broke, always out of a job. If we give just the slightest reflection to our own lives, we cannot help but be startled by how we seem dogged by the same situation in all things, year after year, time after time. This deadly reoccurrence is the source of most frustration and mental illness, is the bottom root of all failure. Yet it is avoidable, and the way by which it is avoidable brings complete emancipation of the mind and spirit. For the tiny electromagnetic field has inherent within it the ability to change the kind and quality of its field so that it will be moved about within the main field with all the power and sureness of the main field until it arrives at the position its new quality of consciousness demands. The important thing to remember about this illustration is that the tiny electromagnetic field does not move itself. It is moved by the large field, and behind its movement lies all the power of the large field. Any attempt by it to move itself is obviously futile, since it is held in place by a power infinitely greater than itself, and it is held where it is because of what it is. The moment of change occurs within itself. It is moved by a power outside itself to a new position in the field, one in keeping with its new potential. The mental world. It is a mental world we live in, not a physical one at all. The physical is merely an extension of the mental, and an imperfect extension at that. Everything we see, hear, and feel is not a hard and inescapable fact at all, but only the imperfect revelation to the senses of an idea held in mind. It is not the planets and stars, the elements and winds, or even the existence of life itself that is the miracle that demands our attention. It is consciousness. It is the mere fact of being, the ability to say, I, consciousness, is an indisputable fact, the greatest miracle of all, and all the sights and sounds of the world are merely side effects. The hidden I. To be conscious is to be conscious. There are not different kinds. The I that is in your neighbour is the exact same I within you. It may appear to be different through being attached to different sensory experiences, but that is only because it has allowed itself to be conditioned by such experience. In point of actual fact, consciousness is never the result of experience, but the cause instead, and wherever we find it, it is primarily aware of existing, of being I. There is only one basic consciousness in all creation. It takes up its residence in all things, appears to be different according to the things it enters into, but in essence is never changed at all. It is intelligence, awareness, energy, power, creativeness, the stuff from which all things are made. It is the alpha, the omega of existence. It is you. Everything in nature contains all the powers of nature. Everything is made of one hidden stuff, wrote Ralph Waldo Emerson. There can be no inner peace or surety of action without this basic spiritual knowledge. The man who lives isolated from the roots of his being has cut himself off from the source of all power and dwells alone and without resource in a hostile and threatening world. Let him once perceive the true nature of life and his relationship to it, and he soon sees that the world always reflects his thoughts. The mask. The surface mind or sense self or ego is the villain of the play that is being enacted on the human stage at present. Man, as a form of life, is sufficiently evolved so as to understand his separateness and uniqueness. He does not truly understand what he is, only that he is conscious and confined within a particular body, and that the experience and knowledge he acquires, together with his disposition as to their use, he labels I, and thus he is deluded into calling a ghost by his own name. Hidden behind this ghost, obscured by its struggles and fancies, is the secret self, which even though hidden, ignored or misunderstood, nevertheless moves all things on the chessboard of life according to their natures and aspirations. We are never ego or sense self. These are masks that we don as we play at the parts we find in life. What we truly are is not a changing thing, but is whole and entire, powerful and serene, limitless and eternal. It springs from the inexhaustible source of life itself, and when we learn to identify ourselves with it, then we have hitched a ride on a power so far beyond our tiny temporal selves that our lives are changed in the most amazing manner. As long as we are responsive solely to the stimuli that impinge upon our senses from the outer world, we have no choice but to be victims of every circumstance. Locked to the senses, we reel under each stimulus, now aggressive, now afraid, now joyful, now sad, now seeking death, now life. But always our inner serenity and equilibrium are in the hands of something we neither understand nor control, and so we are puppets pulled by invisible and unknown strings. But the moment that we pause long enough in the headlong rush of life to see that we are not moving in accord with or in response to our own decisions, but rather in reaction to the world around us, then we have taken the first step towards freedom. Our hates, loves, fears, envies, aspirations, deceits are for the most part products of circumstance, of false and limiting codes and mores, more often innate terrors of mountains than that of molehills, and the solution to all of them is to stand foursquare before them, daring them to do their utmost, exposing them for what they are, thus forswearing allegiance to the cupidity of the deluding and blinding ego which forever keeps us thinking that we are greater than others and less than we truly are. The liberating power. Only when you come to grips with your own mental essence, only when you arrive at a realization of the ever-changing nature of I, will it become apparent that everything is in a constant state of growth and development and aspiration, and there are no limits and finalities and defeats, and anything is possible to one who first conceives the image in his mind. There is within us a power of complete liberation, descended there from whatever mind or intelligence lies behind creation, and through it we are capable of becoming anything and doing anything we can visualize. The mental stuff of which we are made is of such a kind and quality that it responds to the formation of images within it by the creation of a counterpart that is discernible to the senses. Thus any picture we hold in our minds is bound to resolve in the material world. We cannot help ourselves in this. As long as we live and think, we will hold images in our minds, and these images develop into the things of our lives. And so long as we think a certain way, we must live a certain way, and no amount of willing or wishing will change it. Only the vision we carry within. The law of life. It is astounding and sad to see the many thousands of people whose mental machinery keeps delivering to them the very effects they say they do not want. They bewail the fact that they are poor, but that doesn't make them richer. They complain about their aches and pains, but they keep right on being sick. They say that nobody likes them, which means they don't like anybody. They aren't bold, they aren't aggressive, they aren't imaginative. Mentally, they quiver and quake and are bound to negative delusions. It simply doesn't matter what the picture in your mind is. It is delivered nonetheless with the same amount of faithfulness and promptness, if it is a picture of poverty or disease or fear or failure, as it would be if it were a picture of wealth or health or courage or success. The law of life is this: all things, both good and evil, are constructed from an image held in mind. Image power. The image power of the mind is imagination. But just what imagination is and where it comes from, nobody seems to know. Thinking is performed not by a part of the body or even the whole body, but by the inhabitant within. It is that function which enables consciousness to know its surroundings and know itself. Only one who thinks is able to say, I. Only one who can say, I, is able to cast up pictures within his own being, known to no others. The secret self. It is knowledge about and faith in this secret self that is the key to correct use of the imagination. No man lives in the dark when he learns where the light is. To understand the secret self is to free oneself from bondage to circumstance, to lose within a power compounded upon itself, and to provide life with perfect working and perfect serenity. The secret self is timeless and eternal. It is the self of the universe, and it is the self of each of us, the self of you. It was never born, and it will never die. It enters into each of its creations and becomes that creation. What is going on in life and the world and the universe is completely its working and the result of its secret purpose and undivulged goal. The nature of its being is mental. Its essence is dynamic and creative. It is the eternal stuff that occupies all space and time, and within which there is no dimension. It is all ends and middles and opposites and extremes, and it is infinitely creative. Mental ascendancy. The secret self is within you. It is not visited upon a fortunate few and withheld from others, but is totally existent in the heart of each of us. Insofar as we are able to divorce ourselves from the world and the ego and sensual stimuli, we will become increasingly aware of its existence within and consciously strive to identify ourselves with it. It is through this identification that the seeds of power are sown. One who is able to cast off the limitations of ego and improve the quality of his consciousness through disciplinary use of the imagination is able, by means of direct identification, to become one with the secret self, and thus attain to a measure of its power for perfection. This secret self is within each of us, and we can come to know it and to use it, and thus transcend the laws of nature and free ourselves from bondage to the senses and the material world. Thoughts become things. What is going on in life is the evolution of the individual to complete oneness with the secret self. It is not necessary that we become saints to understand as much of the secret self as is necessary to use its power in our affairs. We know this law is enough. Whatever we accept as a permanent mental image in our consciousness must manifest in our world, for we become in life what we are in consciousness, and nothing can alter that fact. It takes a great deal of courage to admit to yourself that if you are sick, frightened, frustrated, or defeated, you have brought these conditions on yourself, and no one but yourself can get rid of them. Occasionally someone so afflicted will experiment with the power of his mind to cure him. For example, he is ill and in pain. He might say, "I visualized myself well and happy, but I hurt just as much as ever." What he didn't do above all things was visualize himself well and happy. He visualized himself sick and in pain. The moment he began to visualize himself well and happy, he would become well and happy. This is not a law that works once in a while, or part of the time, or on auspicious occasions. It works all of the time, and it works in the exact same way, and it is returning to you right now in the material world the images you maintain in your mind. You cannot escape them. They surround you, sustain you, or torment you. They are good or evil, or uplifting or degrading, according to the vision that prompts them. And as long as you are alive, as long as you think and imagine, you are literally surrounded day and night by the images that predominate in your consciousness. Thought control. You need no hypnotist to put the power of the secret self to constructive work in your life. No hypnotist can overcome the negative image making of your mind unless he is with you 24 hours a day. You are the only one in constant rapport with yourself, and thus you are the only one able to police the thoughts and images you entertain. If you let the image be promoted by something outside you, then you exercise no control over your life. If you accept images only in accord with your desires, then life will deliver your inner goals. In any case, the magnificent promise of the secret self is this: you can change your life by altering the images in your mind, for what comes to you in the end is only that which you have been accepting in consciousness. Mind over matter. There is absolutely no such thing as accomplishment unless it is preceded by a vision of that accomplishment. You simply can't reach across the table and pick up a dish unless you first have the mental image. All things come to all people according to the pictures that form in their minds. No amount of movement of physical energy expended can prevail against a wrong mental image. Likewise, the possessor of the correct mental image is guided to perform the work to be done. Most of the struggling and striving in the world is done by people who are trapped into unwanted circumstances through incorrect mental visualization, and the fact that they visualize the very thing that they profess to abhor is the contradictory situation that is filling our psychiatrists' couches. Mastery over fate. Bernard Spinoza wrote, "So long as man imagines that he cannot do this or that, so long as he is determined not to do it, is it impossible to him that he should do it." The picture that forms in the mind, whether for good or ill, will deliver its inevitable consequence. The problem is not with the mental or spiritual fact of physical fulfillment of mental visualization, but rather of finding a key that will enable each person to cast up mental images at will, hold them until realization, and not have other images intruded by the recalcitrant subconscious, which so often runs contrary to the wishes of the conscious mind. In the deeper reaches of the human psyche, the seeds are formed that motivate a whole life, and a man either accedes to or takes command of these invisible prompters. If he accedes, his life will be run from a source beyond his conscious control. If he takes command, he becomes master of his fate. Taking command is never as simple as it sounds. It requires a firmness and boldness that only few people innately possess. Most of us live as complete slaves to reaction, absolute victims of the commands of the subconscious, and we seldom, if ever, even think it possible that we can overcome our feelings and react in an entirely different way than circumstances would have us do. Nature's vast creativity springs from the infinite potentiality of the secret self. Anything possible of conception is sure to eventually be created as a solid material fact for all the world to witness. There is no such thing as an idea without a visible resolution, for the great plasticity of the secret self shapes every idea contained within it, and whoever is possessed of a thought is possessed of a thing as well, as long as he holds his image clear. Creativity. You are not conscious mind or ego or memory or sensual being, but were born directly from the mind that formulated and constructed the universe. And you are not different from that mind, but attached to it by a mental and spiritual construction that makes you and it the same. For when a man attunes himself to the life force and mental entity that gives him consciousness and lives within him, then he takes on by a process of identification the effectiveness and potency of the infinite and eternal entity from which his individual life has sprung. His horizons expand, his consciousness widens, there wells up from secret and subterranean springs a constantly increasing and never ceasing power for perfection and perfect understanding. Knowledge, the great lever. The little mind that sits immediately behind our eyes has not the horizons, nor the expanded consciousness to see the larger picture, the worthier and greater goal of the secret self. All individual suffering, frustration, and failure stem from the failure of the surface mind to find and properly identify itself with the divine. In isolating ourselves from the true roots of our being, we are thrown out of kilter with the power and surety of the Supreme. By fancying ourselves to be sense-minded only, we are like the severed tail of a snake, possessed of movement still, but senseless now, without purpose or entity, scratching out a crazy pattern in the dust. The giant within. We are one body only, one mind only, one deep and abiding intelligence. We are not tiny, infinitesimal parts of an infinite and incomprehensible whole, but we are that very whole, that entire mind, that great and vast intelligence from which the universe has evolved, and everything contained within the universe is contained within us. And if we truly understand ourselves, we will understand the world and everything in it. You can be anything you want to be. Do anything you want to do. Tread any path you will to tread. Become master of your fate. Ordain your future. But you will not do these things by railing against circumstance, by throwing yourself frantically against events and persons simply because they do not seem to be in accord with your plans. Only by perceiving the hidden purpose behind events, the true motivations that actuate people, will you be able to attune yourself to life, to act in accord with the gigantic tides that bring the future. This faculty is yours once you have gleaned the existence of the secret self and have set about striving to live in accord with it rather than with the surface self that has moved you heretofore. The ultimate resource. Breaking through the limiting boundaries of the ego into the unimpaired vision and knowledge and joy of the secret self is the undoubted goal of evolution, the purpose of life. This transformation, truly a transfiguration of the mind and spirit, is not an absolute thing, but a matter of degree, is partially achieved at this moment by thousands of living persons, is possible of limited attainment by everyone who lives. It then must break through the barriers of its awareness, cease living in the ego, and attain the widened horizons and powers of the secret self. Or it will fall back into the inertia of the sensual nature, lose its capacity for growth and development, and so cease to represent the secret self at all. Struggle and sacrifice. Will you have the power and assurance and serenity of the secret self? Then there is something you must give up. You must give up the ego, that thing within you that you always have thought to be your very self. You must seek to shed that sense of separateness that is a product of your surface mind, and to search deep within your consciousness for the pure core of being that is the self of all things. It will not be easy. The sensual nature, with its constantly distracting stimuli, brings daily clarion calls from the outer world. But if your life has provided you full measure of pain and frustration, then you will face them with resistance and resolve to pursue them no more. The path to power lies within you. All things will be found there. The fight is not between the world and you, but between your ego and your true self. Simply choose to find your true self, and in the end, you cannot lose. When the fight begins within himself, a man's worth something. Robert Browning.